with some DraftKings picks, FanDuel lineup advice, best bets, predictions, everything you need for this UFC pay-per-view in Newark, New Jersey. Islam Makhachev, Dustin Poirier. We also randomly have Sean Strickland and Paulo Costa as a 5-round fight. So 2 5-round fights, 12 fights on the card, and we're here to break it all down for you, DFS, betting, and for your viewership purposes. Welcome. I am Brian Juster, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy, joined by Jake the Snake, owner of MMADFS.com. We had a week off, and now the tough stretch starts over the summer. Jake, what's up, man? How you feeling?
Feeling good, man. Refreshed. Nice to get a week off, recharge, get caught up on some things, check out some trends, see where we're at.
Absolutely. So what we're going to do here, if you guys are new, don't worry, we got you. If you have been around for a while, you know the drill. We're going to discuss the main event, talk about both 5-round fights. We will analyze the one newcomer on the card, his first fight in the UFC. We have a handful of other fighters who have less than 4 fights in the UFC, so we'll give some context to their stats. And we'll close out the show with our underdog fantasy pick'em play of the slate, a fight that you have to target in DFS, and our stream parlay of the week. Lots to talk about. Now, this is a live Q&A, so if you are watching this live, go ahead and ask questions in the chat. If you're stopping by, say hi in the chat. We always like to see it. We got Mr. Grapefruit in the chat. Danny, Patrick, what's up, guys? Appreciate you stopping through and saying what's up. And we'll check in periodically through the chat and answer your questions. If you're watching this on replay, we appreciate you watching nonetheless. And the best way, if you're watching on replay, is to hop in our Discord server for any further questions, occupyfantasy.com/Discord. We got Randy Scores back in the chat. Nickel, what's up, guys? We appreciate all of you. So, Jake, before we get into Makhachev and Poirier, 2 5-round fights. 12 fights on the card, pay-per-view. I don't want to, throw water on it right off the bat into a 30-minute show, but this looks like a really tough slate for DFS tournaments just because of 2 5-rounders, only 12 fights, a lot of known quantities on the card, and typically these aren't the best slates for unique winners. Am I wrong? And for the people who haven't played a ton of UFC DFS or just need a refresher, when we have 2 5-round fights, what's it typically mean for us?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, you just look at the slate and it's definitely challenging when you've got a lot of chalk that's probably going to hit. You only have 12 fights. You've got 2 main event favorites who are probably going to win and probably going to score a bunch of points. You've got guys like Jailton Almeida, who is always super popular and has a crazy high ceiling. So, yeah, I mean, there are lots of ways where this slate, at the end of the day, we're like, well, that was terrible. All the chalk scored 130 points and the winner was split 80 ways. But there are also ways that, we can get leverage off of those popular plays. And if it doesn't go that way where they score a million points, then we can quickly, cut off 40, 50% of the field if those fighters aren't in the winning lineup. So, I mean, there's 2 ways to look at it: high risk, high reward. Just figure out what your risk tolerance is with your exposure. But I think strategy wise, it makes the most sense, right off the bat in tournaments. Don't start your lineups with both 5-round favorites. That's a recipe for a hugely duped lineup. So pick one of them. I would say either play exactly one favorite or play one favorite and one underdog. Those are the 2 approaches I'm going to take. And I think looking at historical slates, that covers about 2/3 of the winning lineups on slates. So, I mean, you're going to get the majority of them just off those 2 lineup constructions. So I think that's the way to go. And if you go other routes, like both dogs, I think that's unnecessarily risky, both 5-round dogs. And if you go both 5-round favorites, it's too chalky. You're going to have a ton of dupes. If you go no 5-round fighters, again, that's too risky. It's only won like once. So, yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of lineup construction ways, just looking at the 5-round fights, that we can eliminate and really narrow down our building process, both when it comes to, building winning lineups and building lower duplicated lineups. So, yeah, those are my 2 like initial strategies for approaching the 5-round fights.
Very good stuff. So, folks, you heard it here. Lots of great strategies there. Some good nuggets for building tournament lineups on this slate. Danny says Kopylov is the leverage lock of the night. We will certainly talk about that fight. Robin said he's ready to win 200K. Bravdini says shine bright like a diamond. So the chat is bumping. Let's see you guys keep throwing in comments and questions throughout the show. All right, let's start with Islam Makhachev, Dustin Poirier, and a matchup we probably didn't expect maybe 6 months ago, but here we are. And Jake, simply, is there a way Poirier wins this fight? I know many diehard UFC fans, Poirier fans, think he has a puncher's chance. Certainly does, right? New gloves, anything can happen in fighting. Money line would indicate otherwise. But as you and I were talking before the show, Jake, Islam is not just your run-of-the-mill UFC fighter. This dude actually has fight IQ, builds and follows game plans, knows Dustin's weakness here. I mean, is there any other outcome here besides the inevitable Makhachev taking him down once or many times and finishing him on the mat?
Man, I really think that's how it plays out, man. I mean, Makhachev, probably the best wrestler in the UFC right now in his prime, 32 years old. I mean, people want to look at his one UFC loss in 15 fights where he got knocked out. It's a long time ago. I think he's grown a lot as a fighter. He's a better striker now. I think he learned from, that past experience. I do think that he's just going to take Dustin down. I mean, Dustin's not really a guy that just has that one punch finishing power.
Right.
You look at his fights and almost all of them go into the later rounds. He's generally getting taken down a bunch. I mean, you look at the guys who are taking him down, like Michael Chandler took him down 3 times. Dan Hooker took him down 4 times. Habib took him down 7 times. His last 2 title fights, he got submitted in the 3rd round in both of them. I mean, none of these are good signs, for Poirier. And yeah, he came off the win over Benoit, so there's some recency bias. Like, oh, everyone thought he was going to get submitted there, and he knocked him out in the 2nd round. Like, he was getting dominated for a round and a half, and Benoit gassed out and then later said he had a staph infection. So I'm not making excuses for the guy, but Islam is a lot better than Benoit from every perspective. But most important probably is going to be cardio. Like, it's not like Dustin Poirier just has to survive a round and a half and he's going to be looking at a teed up finish like in that last one. Like, no, he has to survive 25 minutes.
Cardio and recklessness, by the way, I will say.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, Benoit, right. I mean, I'm just pointing out the cardio because in my opinion, that's why Dustin won is Benoit couldn't keep the pace up. But yeah, totally reckless. Islam is way smart. Islam is better than Benoit, everywhere. So I don't think that we should look at that fight like, oh, well, Dustin can do that again. Like, no, very different fights. So I think it is, I think the odds are fair. If not, Islam should be an even bigger favorite. Like, I think this is like a miracle punch from Poirier to win. Like, I don't think he's going to lock up a guillotine. I don't think he's going to be able to survive for 25 minutes and win a decision. Like, it's really going to take like a miracle knockout. And I don't see it happening, man. I think Islam's too good. I think he's going to get him down multiple times, control him, maybe play with his food for a little bit, and then submit him. I mean, the way we've seen in the past, like not to just point to the obvious, but I think it's obvious. Like, I think it happens, man. I think Islam controls him on the mat and submits him, man. And yeah, he could ground and pound him, but I don't think so. I think he's gonna submit him. It's been the kryptonite for Poirier throughout his career, and I don't think at 35 years old anything is really changing now.
No, exactly. As Islam has said in his interviews this week, I think it was DC was talking to him. It's like, he brought in Gamrot to help him wrestle, and Islam was like, brother, he can't learn wrestling in 6 months or a year or 3 years. We've been wrestling since we were 3 years old, right? So you can't show up those weaknesses. My biggest question, Jake, is in these types of situations generally, I will look to play the underdog in tournaments. But usually they're like 10% owned, 15% owned. That's such a big underdog, even just to fade Poirier when his ownership exceeds his win probability.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, man. Like, especially if we're saying that his only chance of winning is a finish where it's like 14% chance according to the odds. He's projected at 26%. But even if you take his money line, it's only 19% implied win percentage, and he's going to be well above that own. So yeah, objectively a bad play in tournaments. Yeah, I mean, I can't really say much more. Like, regardless of your opinion, just looking at the numbers, he's objectively a bad play if he's 26% owned and the odds say he's a 19% chance of winning. And honestly, I think his chances are lower.
I agree. Now, that makes it sound like in low risk contests on DraftKings where we look to stack 5-round fights for both floor and ceiling. This fight doesn't really lend itself to that sort of safety. So we're probably looking to the second 5-round fight on the card to stack in our low risk lineups, our 50-50s, our double ups, our head to heads. And that is Sean Strickland and Paulo Costa. Jake, do you agree with that assessment? This fight is favored at least to go longer than the Poirier and Islam fight. And then secondly, how do you see the Strickland and Costa fight playing out? Do you think it's mostly just going to be a stand-up striking battle for as long as it lasts?
Yeah, for sure, man. I think that one's pretty obvious too. And I mean, absolutely. We're always saying you on these cards with 2 5-round fights in low risk, you want to play 3 of the 4 5-round fighters. I mean, it's a no-brainer to leave Poirier out. The other fight is supposed to run much longer. You look at the decision odds, it's plus 110 compared to plus 370. We've seen Strickland's fights, like they're basically all the same outside of that Abus fight where the dude completely gassed out. I mean, the guy's a 5-round decision machine. Yeah, I mean, neither guy wrestles. They're both high volume strikers. They're both fairly durable. Strickland averages 5.91 significant strikes landed per minute, second most on the slate. Only to Paulo Costa, who averages 6.2 landed per minute. And then you'll get absorbed. Strickland's at 4.33 per minute, and Costa is at 6.38, most on the slate. So Costa is just absorbing and landing massive amounts of strikes. Strickland, pretty much the same deal. And we just see him in all of these super high volume fights that six of his last 8 fights have ended in 5-round decisions that have been super high volume. He won 4 of those, and his 2 losses were both split. So he's been in just a bunch of basically the same fight over and over again, and this one actually sets up to be even higher volume than any of those. So it should be crazy high volume. I don't really think we see a finish. I think it's probably going to end in another crazy high volume decision that Strickland wins, which keeps Costa in the discussion. If you want to look at ways to get unique, I mean, a fight stack, like while it only happens like 3% of the time, I think we had 4 in the last 110 UFC slates. This is the perfect environment for it to happen. Super high volume decision where Sean Strickland should win. Costa comes in at 7,400 on DraftKings and could still score, 60, 65 points, even in a loss. And I think he makes even more sense on FanDuel where striking is even more valuable.
That makes a ton of sense. That really does make a ton of sense. And you were telling me earlier in the week, you look at a lot of fight cards and how many dogs are projected to win just based on odds. And this is one of the lowest number of dogs expected to win on the card. And it makes sense. We have high money lines. We have a lot of known quantities. So that does open up the possibility for a fight stack to get there in terms. Now, granted, we are 0 for 10, 20, 30, 50, and actually saying these could possibly happen. It's always the random fights that end up as fight stacks and winners that end up happening. But Jake, clock is right once a day, right? We have to eventually get this potentially right. But I do like your line of thinking there that this could be a fight stack in tournaments.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we've given out more than, like 10 at the most,
Right.
even mentioning that it's even possible. But yeah, I mean, you look at the times it happened, it was like Peter Yan, Sandhagen, super high volume decision, Marlon Vera, Rob Font, super high volume decision, Whaley, Namajunas, where that was like a close fight and they were both cheap and all the dogs basically lost, Ange Lusa and McKee, where McKee was super cheap. Yeah, I mean, those are the times we've seen fight stacks. That's super rare. I'm not saying it will happen. I'm just saying it's definitely, if you like playing those types of outcomes, this is the time to do it.
All right. Always hit you with a random question for exposures. You're making 150 lineups in the $25 GPP on DraftKings. Your only options for your 150 lineups is either 100% Strickland, 100% Costa, 100% fight stack, 100% fully fade. Which one are you picking?
Yeah, it's Strickland.
All right. Well, that was anticlimactic. So, all right, let's move on. Now let's talk about the one newcomer on the card. Again, if you guys have questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat. We will happily answer them. Red Pill Al says, great video as always. We appreciate you. Thank you for stopping through. All right. First fight of the night, Mitch Raposo. A couple opponent changes here against Andre Lima. Mitch Raposo, who Jake and I have seen, and if you chart your own fights or you watch other outside the UFC fights, you'll know the name. Fought on the Contender Series and lost. Fought on the Ultimate Fighter, also lost. Not a great start for Mitch Raposo's resume here. But he is stepping in nonetheless against Andre Lima. Jake Raposo, what have you seen on tape from him? What can we expect from him here in this debut?
Yeah, he's still young, 25 years old, 9-1, 7 finishes, coming in on short notice. I think it was announced like 11 days out, so really didn't have much time. You already mentioned it. He went on the Ultimate Fighter in 2021, lost the wrestling heavy decision. That was at 135 pounds, where he fought most of his career. Then he dropped down to 125 just 6 months later, went on Contender Series, got submitted by Jake Hadley. Always hard when you're moving a weight class, facing a pretty tough opponent. Then he went back to the New England regional scene, which not very heralded. We see a lot of these guys coming off like Cage Titan, CES. It's the Alaska of the East Coast. I mean, most of them do not find much success. But he looked better there. It's always hard to tell when you're facing bad competition. Like, did he look better because he's better or improved? Or did he look better because he was facing a lower level of competition? It could be some of both. At his age, so young, he's a pretty good striker, good movement, good quickness, but he's not not going to land a ton of volume. And his real issue is just he's a terrible grappler. He's really bad on the mat. I saw that he posted something saying that he recently got his black belt. And normally you see guys, they're in the gi, they got the black belt, they're holding it. He was holding like a little certificate he printed off and like a shirt they gave him with like
Like he
black
got
belts.
like
I
he
don't know
got
how
ordained
legit.
online as a minister to officiate weddings.
Exactly. So I don't know how legit his black belt is, man. But he's looked really bad on the mat, and I think that's where he's going to struggle in the UFC, man. He just looks lost. I don't think he really is a very good wrestler, even though he was like a high school state champion. Again, New England scene, maybe not the best for wrestling, but yeah, I'm worried about this guy on the ground. I think he's going to struggle. I think he's probably going to get out wrestled and probably submitted in a lot of fights in the UFC. But decent striker, I think in a large cage that probably favors him because he's constantly like moving around the outside, going in and out, circling away from contact, and he's good at that. But that's not a good strategy for DFS.
Absolutely not. And his opponent, which is a great transition to our next segment, good fighter, good matchup, bad matchup, where we just look at fighters that have less than 4 fights in the UFC, give some context to their stats very briefly. Just quick, are they actually good or bad? Is this a good or bad matchup for them? And his opponent, Andre Lima, first on the list here in this segment. Impressive debut. We were impressed with him coming into the UFC. Notoriously got bit and won by disqualification against Severino. But Lima showed things we expected coming into his debut. And now he gets a much easier matchup, assuming Mitch is not planning to bite him by any means. But Lima typically doesn't proactively wrestle, Jake, but the avenue is there. So I will ask you this. Is Lima as good as we thought he was coming into the UFC? And do you think this is actually a good matchup for DFS?
Yeah, man, I think Lima's solid. I mean, the one concern is that both these guys are a little bit lower volume from a DFS perspective, but I do think Lima will proactively wrestle here, man. He landed like 5 takedowns on the regional scene. I think in his last fight before going on Contender Series. I mean, he's a black belt. He had been a brown belt, so he got his black belt not too long ago. And he showed really good scrambling ability in his debut. Even if he did get taken down like 5 times, he was scrambling back up. He was frustrating, the biter to force the bite. I think he's going to be looking for takedowns here. Like, we'll see how smart he is. I mean, he just missed weight by 4 pounds. So either that could mean a lot of things. It could mean he's, dumb. It could mean he's injured. I mean, it could just mean he had a tough weight cut. It could mean a lot of things. It adds to the volatility of this matchup. It could also mean he's just going to be bigger than Raposo and have an easier time wrestling him if he was just like, whatever, I'm not even going to, try to cut the extra weight. So we don't know why he missed the weight. And that is a concern, but I think he's very well-rounded, former 3-time Brazilian kickboxing champion, black belt. I think he's going to take Raposo down, and I think he's in a good spot to land his first career submission win here.
Yeah, and for those of you playing Pick Six, those of you on Underdog Fantasy or some of these other sites like Prize Picks, over a half takedown potentially for Lima seems like a very good play. We got some other questions in chat. Bravdini, Klaus's first-time viewer. He says, what is DFS? Daily Fantasy Sports. That's where you build fantasy lineups for UFC. But you can use this information that we talk about in the show just to enjoy the fights as a fan or use the information to bet on. So, Jake, let's talk about the next fighter, good fighter, bad fighter. It's Eileen Perez. She has 3 fights in the UFC. Is she good or bad for DFS? Is this a good or bad matchup against Jocelyn Edwards?
I mean, she's good for DFS. She's still super green, but she's just like a crazy, relentless wrestler. And Edwards has massively struggled to defend takedowns and with being controlled on the mat. So I think this is basically a dream matchup here for Perez. Couldn't ask for much more. Yes, I think it's a good DFS fighter in a great matchup. But, Perez is still, still pretty raw and still pretty green. And we saw her the 3rd round of her last fight where she just kind of was on the way to putting up a huge score and then got controlled on the mat and almost submitted in the 3rd round. It's like, okay, well, she's still got a lot of holes in her game, but we like the aggression, we like the wrestling, and this is a great matchup to show it.
Absolutely. We got 2 questions in the chat. Let's pause this segment for a second. Answer these questions. They're more high level. Brav says, which low-owned fighters are you over the field on? I think just based on this card, if you're building multiple lineups, you have to be over on every low-owned play. Jake, to me, none of them really stand out as, oh, this is a fighter that I really want to get overweight on. I just feel like I have to based on ownership and game theory reasons. Talk about Jocelyn Edwards here. under 20% if Perez gasses or fights suboptimally. Mickey Gall is another guy who we'll talk about here in this segment. His opponent has only just one fight in the UFC. Top of your head, any fighter you're particularly excited to get overweight on as a low-owned play?
Man, it's definitely tricky because it's such a chalky card, and I do think the faves are going to kind of smash. But I guess I think Dos Santos, man, has a shot at finishing Randy Brown here. I think Randy Brown just has a tendency to get clipped and get hurt badly at times, or get his legs completely destroyed. So I hate betting on older guys. Dos Santos is 37, had the PED suspension after the Benoit fight. But if I had to pick between Dos Santos, Morano, I mean, Morano could definitely get a finish too. Price, Edwards, Gall, Raposo. I mean, then yeah, it's gonna be Dos Santos or Morano are probably the two that have the best shot here with like tournament winning upside. But Edwards too, as a hedge to Perez. But I'm not excited about Price, and Gall is terrible and coming off back surgery. And Raposo, I guess you could say with the weight miss, that's some reason to be over on him. But doesn't look like a great DFS play. So yeah, it is tricky, man. You just kind of have to spread it out and kind of be over on everyone and hope that one or two of them hit.
For sure. And a friend of the show, Randy Scores, long-time subscriber at OccupyFantasy.com and subscriber at MMADFS.com, Jake's site, says, which of the high-owned 3 fighters would you fade in 150? Or per earlier, do you just play them all with the rules? So for those of you who are wondering on DraftKings, we have only 3 guys projected over 30%, and all 3 are projected to be over 40% owned in large field tournaments as Islam Makhachev, Sean Strickland, and Jailton Almeida. Now, it is extremely scary to fade any of those 3. Jake, I think Islam would probably be number 1, just hoping that it's a quicker or ill-timed finish and he gets priced out at 9,500. For me, Almeida would be number 2, and we hope that he dials it back after a KO loss or we get a slot fest against Romanov. Strickland's probably number 3, but I'm curious to get your ranking of which guys you would fade in 150.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Like, I don't think you can fully fade any of them, but I think the move is to be under on Islam, under on Jailton, and over on Strickland. And like what you said, I mean, hopefully Islam gets priced out. Can definitely happen if we don't get many dogs winning at his price tag at 9,500. If he scores 110, he can still get priced out.
Right.
Almeida, obviously we're hoping that he busts somehow, like gasses out, gets more tentative after the last loss, just somehow doesn't score 120. And then, yeah, I mean, Strickland, I think it's the toughest because he's cheaper, right, and he's got a crazy high floor and a super high ceiling. So he's the guy that I would feel the least comfortable fading.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, continuing on with good fighter, bad fighter, good matchup, bad matchup. Again, if you have questions or you just want to stop by and say hi, say what's up in the chat, throw your question in there. We'll answer it along the way. So we just talked about Eileen Perez. Let's talk about Basil Hafiz, who impressive debut, all things considered, against Jack Della Maddalena. And now he had some time off. His opponent, Mickey Gall, has had some time off, as you just said, Jake. So we only have 15 minutes of UFC time, and we don't want to weight his overperformance too heavily there. So is he good or bad? Is this a good or bad matchup against Mickey Gall?
Yeah, I think Hopez is good, man. He's a good grappler. He's a high-level black belt. He trains, with like Justin Gagey and other guys out in Colorado at Elevation. He's from Philadelphia, so he doesn't have to travel far for this fight. Should have some crowd support, even though Gall is from New Jersey. But come on, everyone hates Mickey Gall. I think Hopez is good. My only concern is his cardio, man. Like, I know he gassed out in his last fight, and like, okay, it was short notice, so it's understandable, but that's not the first time he's gassed out in a fight. Like, he looks tired consistently late in fights. So there is some concern that he could dominate for a round and a half and then slow down. But Mickey Gall has bad cardio too. So in this matchup, I'm not as worried about that. In future matchups, I'll be more worried about Hafez's cardio. But I think he's the better wrestler, the better grappler, the better striker, just better everywhere than Mickey Gall. And they actually fought in like a grappling tournament 11 years ago. It doesn't mean anything, but Hafez beat Gall back then. So, I mean, they have like felt each other in a competitive, environment before.
Fair enough. And as Barry in the chat says, there is 2 Almeidas on the card. Yes, there is. There is Jailton Almeida. He is the one we expect to be 40% plus owned. We expect him to be the most popular. We also expect the next guy on the list to be somewhat popular as well, Cesar Almeida, who the line flipped in his favor. He's now a slight favorite on a card where we're hurting for dogs. I expect him to be somewhat popular, especially in smaller contests here. We do expect this to be basically a stand-up striking battle, Jake. And Almeida, I don't think based on his debut, if you only watch his debut, you may not be impressed. You may not get the full scope of his skill set because he was being attempted to be taken down, pressed up against the cage for nearly the entire fight. But now we get two strikers who are likely going to just go at it for as long as it lasts. So talk to me about Cesar Almeida, not Jonathan, Cesar Almeida. Is he good or bad? And how do you rate this matchup with Kopylov?
Yeah, just to make it easy, we'll just call him Jilton and Cesar from now on. No,
There you
no
go.
more Almeida.
There you go.
It's honestly hard to know just how good Cesar can be in MMA. You know, he had a long kickboxing career. He fought Alex Pereira 3 times, went 1-2. All 3 of them went the distance. That at least speaks to his durability and the level of competition he was facing before he transitioned to MMA. But then he had 3 MMA fights where they all ended in first round knockouts against like very low level of competition. Then he goes on Contender Series, and the guy wants to do nothing but wrestle with him. And he actually comes out ahead in that, you know, he gets on top. He's like landing ground and pound. And he actually showed that, you know, he can defend takedowns. He can get back to his feet. He can like reverse positions. He's not great off his back, but he's also not helpless in those exchanges. And then he faced a one-dimensional wrestler in his recent debut who wanted to do nothing but try to control him and take him down. And Cesar outlasted him and then finished him with strikes, showing that, you know, he's powerful, he's dense, he's like when he's landing, he's making these shots count, and he can survive against people who are trying to out wrestle him. He's not going to be completely helpless in those exchanges, but we also haven't seen him in a pure striking battle against a high level striker. So I think there's still a lot of unknowns about him in an MMA fight. You know, kickboxing got bigger gloves on, MMA got 4-ounce gloves on. I think he's going to be pretty destructive. I think he's going to do a lot of damage, but we haven't seen it yet. So there's still some questions that are unanswered in terms of both his, you know, his cardio in a 15-minute striking battle, his durability, just how much damage he can do himself. But I have high expectations of him. I think he's going to do well. I think that he's got a ton of combat experience. And this is the perfect matchup to show it. So, like you said, this is going to be a crazy striking battle. Both guys want nothing to do with grappling. They're both really good strikers. I think this is going to be an absolute banger. I think, you know, both guys are probably going to end up in the hospital afterwards. I went back and forth on it early in the week, but I do think that, you know, Almeida, I think, is probably a little more durable, a little bit better striking defense. So I think Kopylov, we've seen him get busted up in the past at times, and it's kind of risky when you're going against like a, you know, like a world-class kickboxer in Cesar Almeida. So yeah, man, I'm pretty excited for this fight. Honestly, this might be the fight that I'm most excited about on the entire card.
I think without question, I think it should be one of the, if not one of probably the funnest fight to watch. Now, what that means for DFS is a different question. Now, FanDuel scoring, where we get higher points for significant strikes, more for finishes, definitely more valuable over there. But Jay, I could see a situation where if they don't get a good a first round finish or a great time finish in the second or third round, if this goes a little bit long, with their volume and Pearly standing, despite their price tags, I could see them not scoring very well in DraftKings.
No, that's definitely possible. Like, I don't think it's going to be insanely high volume. I think it's going to be one of those fights where it's a better fight to watch than in DFS because we're going to see like crazy striking, but I don't think we're going to see like 150 strikes or something. It's just the strikes that are landing are going to be super impactful and doing a ton of damage. It could definitely be one of those fights where you're watching, like, oh man, this is going to score great, and then the winner scores like 80 points.
Right.
And we'll see. You know, at their reasonable price tags, it's not impossible that an average score could get in the winner if we get a really tight salary slate without many underdog winners. And it's just like you need the value. But we'll see. It could very easily get left out of the winner.
Absolutely. All right, and that does it for good fighter, bad fighter, good matchup, bad matchup. Let's transition to the second half of the show where we will have 3 brief segments. We will talk about our underdog fantasy play of the week, fight you have to target in DFS, and our stream parlay of the week. And real quick, if you haven't already, make sure you are subscribed to our channel here on YouTube. It is free to do so, especially you new viewers. We do these shows every week. There are 12 or more fights, so subscribing is the best way to get notified whether we upload the video Friday night or we go live on Saturday. So subscribing, great free way to support the show and helps you out, let you know when we go live. Give us a thumbs up if you're still watching and you like the content. Jake, let's talk about underdog fantasy. So obviously people out there are doing best ball drafts. We're doing best ball drafts 3 to 4 times per week on our channel. But they also have the pick'em both Pick'em Champions and just the Pick'em Slips. And if you haven't signed up for Underdog Fantasy, if you're in an eligible state, now is the time to do so because they've upped the deposit bonus match up to $250. Sign up with our promo code Occupy, get up to $250 if you deposit $250. Free money to use in Pick'em or Best Ball or whatever you choose. Underdog Fantasy, one of the best ways to play any MMA fantasy related game. So go check it out if you haven't. Jake, and you look at all these sites every week. Which Underdog Fantasy Pick'em play stands out to you the most this week?
Yeah, I really like Sean Strickland over 120 and a half significant strikes. He landed 137 or more in his last 6 fights to make it past the second round. I believe the over 3.5 is currently negative 150 in this fight. So seems like he could very easily soar past that number.
Absolutely. So Sean Strickland, if you want more underdog plays or prize picks or whatever, pick six, check out Jake's site, MMADFS.com. He's got all of those in his premium content. Next, let's talk about the fight to target in DFS. We've talked about quite a few fights here, Jake. We're going to ignore the 5-rounders. We're going to look at the 3-rounders only. If you had to pick a fight that whoever wins is extremely likely to end up in the optimal lineup, which one are you choosing?
Yes, it's a little tricky just because I don't really love any of the dogs in this slate, but I do think it's going to be the Eileen Perez Jocelyn Edwards fight for the sole reason that I think it's either going to be Perez putting up a big number through wrestling, or she's going to trip and fall into an armbar, and Edwards with 90 points is probably still going to end up in the winning lineup.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. That is totally fair to say. And again, when you have Edwards as a lower owned dog, that certainly gives more merit to playing or to targeting a fight as a fight that you have to target in DFS. All right, let's see here. Now let's talk about our stream parlay of the week. Jake, when's the last time we hit a stream parlay?
It's been I think the Tybura Danny Silva decision. Yeah, it was a few slates ago, but we had a little heater going. It kind of cooled off a little bit. Time to warm back up. I think we're due.
Let's warm it back up. So I've talked about just recently the Cesar and Kopylov fight being a stand-up battle. If these guys can just be a little bit durable, I think it goes to decision, and we get that at plus money. So Cesar Almeida, Roman Kopylov to go the distance. What's the latest odds you got for that, Jake? That is going to be my side of the stream parlay.
I think that's at plus 130 right now.
Cool. We'll take that. So what are you going to pair it with?
I'm going to go a little bit higher odds, get us a nice juicy one here. I'm going to go Alex Morano wins by submission at plus 550. This guy loves looking for guillotines, and he almost never knocks anyone out. I think he has 2 knockouts in like 20 UFC fights or something. I know that Nico Price is going up back-to-back knockouts and just got like immediately melted by a half-retired Robbie Lawler. So it's definitely a little bit, nervous picking the sub here, but these guys have fought before. Price knocked out Morano in that fight. I think Morano could be a little bit more gun shy to throw down in a super high volume brawl because of that. But if he gets the opportunity to jump a guillotine, I promise you he will take it. And at plus 550, I think there's a good chance he can finish it. So I'm going to pair those two together. It's going to be plus 1395 on the parlay.
All right, plus 1395. We can certainly do some damage with that. Let's answer the final question here from Brad Dini. Which fighters are X out worthy when building multiple lineups? So you're using our lineup builder or you're building by hand. Which fighters can we cross out immediately? I'll say, Jake, it's not a great slate to immediately look at that because only 12 fights makes it really difficult. You can't really X out the lower owned fighters. So I'm looking at favorites here, Jake, and I'm thinking Grant Dawson, we could see a staring match. We could see back and forth grappling. I don't see him scoring 130 or so to outscore Makhachev or some of the other guys up there. Holland I could see as well, but that's always scary against Makhachev, who has a quick win bonus loss on his record. And then Randy Brown, who we shouldn't expect much grappling as long as he can avoid a round 1 KO, I think could score lower points at 20 to 30% ownership. But not a great slate to immediately X out guys. Do you have any other thoughts on guys or fighters you're looking to not play immediately?
I mean, you stole mine with Grant Dawson. That was going to be the first name I said. And then another one, I think Dustin Poirier. I mean, we talked about it earlier. Like, if you want to take aggressive stands, then, completely fading the underdog that we know is going to be overowned. Regardless if he pulls off the miracle, he's going to be overowned, which makes him a bad play. So if you want to play optimally and you're okay taking a higher risk standpoint, then I think, yeah, Dawson and Poirier are the two that you can X out.
Absolutely. And this transitions to our final question from Randy Scores. Which high-owned dog do you like the most? You just said X out Poirier, so we will remove Poirier from the question. Is it Joe Selecki? Is it Michał Oleksiejczuk? Or is it Alexander Romanov? Of those three, which one do you like the most?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of hate all the underdogs. If I had to take a high-owned dog, it might be Paulo Costa, just hoping that even in a losing effort, he could still be useful. I mean, if we're talking about high-owned underdogs, because I don't know, man. It's pretty gross with dogs on this slate, and it's especially gross with high-owned dogs on this slate. So that's a tough question to answer.
Very tough. And Klaus asks, who's a new viewer, says, "Are you guys fans of the sport, or is it a money thing for you all?" Jake dedicates his life to UFC as his full-time job every single week, so he's certainly a fan of the sport. I watch it every week, and I've won hundreds of thousands of dollars playing it, so it is certainly also a money thing. But why not both? So that'll do it for the show. We appreciate you watching. As always, make sure you are subscribed. If you like the video, give us a thumbs up. Free way to support the channel. Now, if you're the type of person who wants that extra edge when betting or playing DFS for UFC, you're just watching the show for free. That's all you're going to do. We understand. We appreciate you. That's why we do these shows, to help as many people as we can. You want that extra edge. Check out Jake's site, MMADFS.com. Check out OccupyFantasy.com, where you can get articles, premium content, statistical models, and a lineup builder to help you get everything you need to have the best chance of either making money betting DFS, or making money betting UFC, or playing DFS for UFC. So for Jake at DFS_MMA, I am at Brian Jester FF, as well as at Occupy Fantasy. We appreciate you watching. Thank you. Good luck and enjoy UFC 302.